Soul totems have always been elusive in the Hollow Knight lore community. These plentiful soul recharges serve generally as a small reprieve so you can heal a few masks or just add some flavor to an area. But few have been quite able to discern their original purpose or the rationality of their placement. I, however, the rightful Duke of Hollownest, believe to have a proper explanation. It will take some time to explain, so bear with me, for we must first discuss the ancient civilization before Hollownest. This elusive bunch is known by many names, some being the Void Kingdom, the Ancient Civilization, the Black Kingdom, the Soviet Union, but today I will refer to them as either the Ancient Caste or just the Ancients, on account that I like the way it sounds. Anyway, these were a commune of bugs of which lived long before Hollownest and the Pale King. We don't know much about them, but we do know that they worshipped Void. We get this from the description of the Void idols obtained through certain feats in the Hall of Gods. We also know they mostly resided in the deeper parts of Hollownest, like the Ancient Basin and the Abyss. Deep in their former lands, there is a consistent dark brick rock that appears in the architecture and environment. It appears in places like the Black Egg, the ancient blacksmith's prison, and possibly in the Massmaker's home. This material is very similar to that present in the Soul Totems, further cementing the already clear connection. What I find very interesting, however, is a certain piece of dialogue spoken by Elderbug regarding the ancient basin and this strange material.
Did you know the caverns continue even below the capital? Few have ventured that deep, so the details are scant. Those who made it back told of impossibly old structures, and roads formed as though the rock itself possessed a will.
This is a very deliberate choice of words by Team Cherry, I'm sure. We are led to believe that this material has some sort of will of its own, but from here, how could the ancient caste have lived with such a prospect? I'm sure the Ancient Homeowners Association would not like plain remodeling of neighborhoods because the rock felt like it. So we'd have to assume that the ancient caste had some sort of influence upon this rock, whether that be directly shaping the rock using their own will, or nudging it along with their sort of manipulation. What I think is a much better thought is the idea that the rock was granted a will of its own by this very ancient caste, and that it wasn't innately capable of such grandeur. Let us look at the description for the Void Tendrils fossil found in the Abyss. An imprint of Abyss given form. Note given in this situation. The Void didn't have will in this case. It was formed by the ancient caste for its own devices. Whatever nasty Void tentacles could be used for anyway. But this can easily tie into the will inside the Abyss rock. The ancients could have imbued the earth with a void to shape their kingdom as they pleased without such laborious actions as actually building it out, or mining through miles of deep slate. This even further extends towards the soul totems. The ancient caste would have formed them through this rock manipulation and imbuing. There is mention by Lem that these totems were proof that the ancients existed. So it is just about undeniable that the ancient caste did in fact create the first totems. And as I might add, they did this through the manipulation of the Void Rock. They were also able to use their powers to make totems disregarding a connection to soul. Specifically, we should take a look at some of the soul totems at the very bottom of Deepnest, right above the Abyss. Here is where we can find Sharp Shadow, embedded into a modified soul totem. It is clearly different in some manner. Note the darker color in the place where the charm would fit snugly. This charm is a clear example of ancient meddling from its description. Contains a forbidden spell that transforms shadows into deadly weapons. The use of forbidden is important here, as it implies the deliberate sealing away of this spell by the ancients. The spell wasn't formed by the modified or maybe even corrupted totem, it was placed there by the ancients. This shows us the primordial nature of these, pointing to them being some of the original totems made by the ancients. They are also some of the closest totems to the Abyss, further showing this idea. It's curious, however, that we find none in the Abyss itself, but they're probably just hidden under all the piles of dead children. The totems are usually just considered soul containers, mere bottles for the ancients to keep soul inside of, but I know this could not be the case. I'd propose that they draw the soul in from around themselves. The first main point for this case is the clear fact that the totems recharge. If they were just jars, then they wouldn't automatically fill up, especially without the aid of an ancient. They are never truly emptied, but more so milked by the player. Second off, gaze yet again upon the Dark Soul Totem. See as it seems to draw in void from around itself in the form of tendrils, as well as visible in the now darker color. These could be signs that this totem has been modified to absorb void, to hold the power of the sharp shadow inside of it. Another possible interesting example of this idea is present in the Black Egg Temple. Its insides clearly flow with soul energy with all the glowing particles and markings. Maybe it was originally made to absorb soul from the large dead bug that surrounds it, or possibly from another source. Nevertheless, it became a perfect holding cell for the Hollow Knight, as the egg absorbed the grand soul power leaking out of the Knight and from the Radiance's dream world. It acted as an extra buffer after the Hollow Knight became a bit less hollow. Finally, we need to take into account the special soul totems found in the White Palace. Seeing as the Pale King was just as invested in tampering with the void as the ancient caste was, it makes sense he would learn to make his own totems in both his own and his child's image. But the most important note from this passage is how both versions evidently never run out of soul to siphon. This is more apparent in the true vessel totems, as they literally won't stop dispensing, but even the king's totems still glow with soul energy after being quote-unquote depleted. Why is this so, you may ask? Well, I think it fair to say that it is by nature of where the totems are seated, that being the dream world, such a place where all soul is siphoned, whether that be through a dream nail or otherwise. Though this could be seen as infinite storage, it is much more likely to be a very fast recharge from all the soul in the air. I'd believe that all of these points should support my idea of the totems absorbing, not just storing. But that isn't the main point of why I'm here. Regarding the creation of these totems and their control by the ancient caste, we have to address what happened after the disappearance of these ancients. Once the ancients had left their living rock with no leader or control to take their place, the rock changed. They certainly didn't begin to run wild, but this unregulation could have brought about the rock's will to a way of its own. We will get back to this, but before going on, we must talk about the Soul Master and his own interest in the soul totems. I'm sorry about all of these side notes, but trust me when I say they are very important. This will be the last one, before we get into the nitty-gritty. The Soul Master has been stealing soul from many City of Tears citizens, as well as harvesting several soul totems for himself. We see a large pile of these ill-gotten gains in the Master's innermost study. But what we also see is the erection of several towers seemingly at home in the Soul Sanctum, as if they were built there not as a reproduction or transplant, but as if the very same ancients built them right there. Note the intact pedestals on these, but the lack of such details near where we know the Soul Master specifically piled the other totems up. Though there are a few examples of pedestal-less totems elsewhere, it doesn't hurt the main point that there are some with totems in this newer building, far newer than the ancient caste. That leaves the question, why and how were these totems created right in the building long after the death of the ancients? And why does the same go for the literal sewers? Yeah, that's right, the royal waterways. A generally new system that the city devised to filter waste and the flooding water out has seemingly ancient statues just built on top of them. This has left many a theorist and player confused. However, it has just as often been overlooked and strewn aside for other topics, citing gameplay mechanics as a good enough excuse. I, of course, have not settled on drawing such a line. Let us recap. We have totems that absorb and then store soul. These were, as I speculate, created by the ancient caste by manipulating void and giving it form, just like the tendrils or stones/bricks surrounding their previous dwellings. Eventually, the ancient caste disappeared, and the void they once utilized now runs more unregulated. From here, we can finally get into the meat and potatoes of my thinking. Okay, so, we know through common sense that these totems were not made on top of sewers that came far after the death of those who supposedly made them. However, we also have direct dialogue from Lem stating that the ancient caste were directly related or responsible for these totems. So how can both of these statements ring true? Well, It is in my fullest confidence that these soul totems were indeed initially created by the ancient caste. However, through their own will of power, they have begun to sprout on their own. The ancient caste has been shown to be able to manipulate and form void to their own needs in the form of the void tendrils. The void tendrils are able to manipulate the lighthouse bug in the abyss into turning off the light that hinders them, and they do this long after the absence of the ancients. Later we even see how the knights molded by the Pale King have the direct wills to serve and protect, and of course, even after the king is long dead, they still serve to protect the castle and that which the king wanted locked away. Here is proof that, without a direct master, the void beings still live on to do as they were supposed to. So why couldn't these formed totems be any different, assuming that they are indeed some sort of void-imbued structures? Without the will of the ancient caste, they continue to absorb soul, and, as I see it, continue to form themselves wherever they see fit, seeming to be drawn to places with more soul than others. Take for instance the Soul Sanctum, back where the Soul Masters harvest soul from dead bugs and keep various gathered totems. There are 2 proper totems just keeping themselves there. I should also add that it wouldn't make sense if the Soul Master only stole totems from outside of the city, as 1, it is mostly blocked off, and 2, why would he leave so many strewn about? It could be assumed that he has had many a soul totem sprout up in his sanctum due to the high soul content, before having them excavated and transferred to his storage. The ones still with pedestals either yet to be transferred or are kept there for convenience/special study. Kingdom's Edge also has one of the highest number of totems. This could be attributed to the many corpses from the Colosseum, bringing about plenty of soul. The area is also very secluded, possibly even away from the touch of the Soul Master. The area also stretches quite deep. Of course, the deeper we go, the closer we are to the past dwelling of the ancients. We even have the prison of the ancient blacksmith here, a structure believed to have been made by the ancient caste. This idea also allows us to understand why these ancient statues would be found in the royal waterways. This incredibly new system of water drainage and waste management is littered with several totems, and the space isn't even that big. But by taking into account the putrid masses of flukes found in the area, we see that these creatures, just brimming with infection, would certainly make plenty of soul to be absorbed. This is just about the perfect place for a soul totem to sprout up when we think about them in such a way. This way of thinking gives us a reason for the strange placement for many of the totems, while still going along with Lem's explanation, seeing as we still agree that the totems were initially spawned by the ancients. But why did the ancient caste make these in the first place? We know that the ancients loved to tamper with void, that is for certain, but these soul totems seem to shift the focus away from void into soul instead. If they merely wanted to study soul through absorbing it, then they would only need to keep a few totems in specific laboratories or study areas, not have them spread throughout the entire kingdom. To find out exactly why they started this, we need to talk to Mask Maker. It is the ancient caste that made an attempt at such a vast rule. Hollownest's ruin reflects those failed attempts. It seems to be that long ago, the ancient caste sought to rule all of Hollownest, just as the Pale King would try much later. They of course were eventually thwarted once they attracted the wrath of the Radiants. We can see in the Radiants' Dreamnail dialogue that they were enemies, referring to the Void as ancient enemy, likely alluding to the ancient caste and their tendency to shape and bend Void to their own will. The Radiants, before the Pale King came along, and even before the ancient caste, had controlled parts of what is now Hollownest with her Moth tribe. This, of course, became a problem when the ancient caste tried to expand their void and influence to the rest of the surrounding area, including this tribe of moths. Though the moths have been known for being rather pacifistic, the Radiance has shown to be very territorial, and the ancient caste must have done something real bad to make her angry. Not angry enough to let out a mass plague, but angry enough to kill an entire civilization of bugs. Why the ancients did this is unknown, but maybe just the natural opposition of soul/essence and void/abyss was enough to set the both of them against each other. Or it could have been this simple matter of unwanted territory expansion on the ancient caste's part. Either way, The ancient caste holds a very similar problem as the Pale King did many years after them. They want to conquer all of Hallownest, but a dreamy ruler already holds control. While the Pale King had dealt with the Radiants by having the Radiants all but forgotten, what could the ancient caste have done to stop such ruling? They seemed independent of the Radiance's influence, and we don't know who else they would want to liberate. We only know for certain that they meant to spread their own power as a commune. What could be useful to this group of bugs trying to lessen the influence of the Radiants while spreading their own? How about totems that absorb soul from the surrounding air and dream world? The ancient caste derived most of their power from the void and abyss. They wouldn't need to harness soul power for themselves. What they would benefit from, however, is drawing power away from the Radiance and her influence. If they were able to make some totems to absorb soul energy from the area and store it within themselves, it could act to take away from the Radiance. Not only that, but if the totems were able to build themselves through an imprinted will of their own, focusing when there is plenty of soul, the ancient caste would not have to do much on their own. They could just sit back and allow their creations to sprout up as needed, take away from the Radiance, and then they would expand their rule a bit. Maybe the Black Egg Temple was an unfinished attempt to seal away the Radiance before being repurposed by the Pale King to do just that. It would seem fitting. Or maybe it wasn't even that, but just a large beacon to absorb as much soul as possible from the high center of the kingdom. Such things can only be speculated, though. And there you have it. The soul totems were formed through void and gifted will by the ancient caste. This was an attempt to absorb soul power away from the Radiance and her dream world by having these totems sprout out where her influence was most and sucking the soul out of the air and dream world. This eventually angered the Radiance, causing her to retaliate heavily, leading to the disappearance of these ancients. We are not certain of the specifics of this event or what exactly happened to them all. Even still, the soul totems sprout up out of the earth, absorbing soul from the dream world and surrounding air. A thorn in the Radiance's side, but without proper pushing and tenting, a seemingly inconsequential one in the end. Now they serve as vague spiritual monuments to the bugs of Hallownest, only the most scholarly knowing a fraction of their origins. This video has been a tad speculative in places, but the ancient caste is already such a nebulous topic that I can't blame myself too much. I would love to hear whatever you have to say about it in the comment section. I consider myself adept in Hollow Knight lore, but I do expect to have made a mistake or two along the way. If and when any substantial additions or corrections arise, I will try to include them in a pinned comment below, just to make sure that it is all readily available. So hey, this took a lot of work to make, so maybe like and subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode when I determine Silk Song's release date using the 57 precepts of Zote in a Rubik's Cube.